Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Clearing a Path to Innovation in Clinical Genomics for Health Insurers. Thank you for joining us, and before we get started, I want to take a moment to go over just a few administrative details. As you have noticed upon joining the webinar, everyone has been placed on mute for the presentation. At the end of the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. So in your GoToMeeting control panel, you'll see a questions box. Please type your questions or comments into the field and hit enter. Also, the recording of this webinar, along with the slide deck, will be emailed to all of our registrants following the live webinar, and you can actually go ahead and download the slide deck. It's in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to today's fantastic speaker and also our co-chair for our Genomics work group, Grant Wood.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that, and the $10 is in the mail for calling me fantastic. I want to thank all of you who are joining live and also those who will listen to this via recording for your interest in this subject, and I hope that as we go through this presentation, you'll find that there's been some valuable information for the time that you invested. So here's a disclaimer that is standard for these presentations. That is part of the slide deck. Sam wanted me to do a quick introduction of myself. So for the past 14 years, I've been working at Intermountain Healthcare in the world of clinical genetics and genomics. My role has been mostly around, from an IT perspective, creating systems that support genetic testing and the collecting of that genetic test data along with family health history data and get that stored into the electronic health record. And we really want to get that data stored in such a way that we could do clinical decision support with it. And just to let you know, that work is still ongoing. We haven't achieved all of those goals yet. Still a lot to do there. I've been working with other, besides working with the WEDI Genomics work group, I work with the HL7 Clinical Genomics work group and a couple of others, one called the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health and the Global Genomic Medicine Collaborative, and actually many other activities that all around trying to solve problems and bring about the most efficient systems that support clinical genomics. So here is the agenda for today. I'm gonna review the state of the industry, and I want to do this just to kind of level set the conversation. The way my mind works is I like to see all of the different pieces of the puzzle within this subject matter, and that includes a broad range of stakeholders. And even though I come from a healthcare system and I come from an IT perspective, I do always look at and talk to and work with people that are part of that whole ecosystem, including the payer community. And so I want to kind of first level set the big picture as we go in and discuss how I see the health insurance agency fits into this picture. So we'll kind of review what's going on with testing, computer technology, and kind of review some current issues and changes that are going on within the industry at the moment. And then we'll jump into focus specifically on genomics and the payer community, the health insurance industry. I have a few critical questions. I call them very high-level ones, and they're not a comprehensive list of questions, but ones that I, from my perspective, I see that the payer industry has been grappling with for several years now, and then discuss what I think are some opportunities for innovation by what is going on in the industry today and what might be in the future. And then having completed what I consider is like the vegetables part of this meal, the genomics and what's coming over the horizon to me is the dessert. That's where I just will spend one slide and we'll talk about some fun technologies that might be exciting in our future. And then one last slide around talking about the genomics work group at WEDI. So jumping into this, let's talk about, once again, what's going on in the industry and focus first on testing. So we have, starting with a description of a lot of different areas where testing is performed, and that includes. Oops, want to get back here. That includes the areas starting with prenatal, carrier, newborn screening, and then we move into the area of doing testing just for disease risk assessment. That is determining maybe somebody might. Let's do testing based on their. We see a family history of lung cancer or other cancers. Let's do a genetic test to see if they might have variants that might put them at higher risk for developing the cancer. We do testing to do diagnosis of the patient. Pharmacogenomics is one a lot of people are aware of and seems to be expanding and how widely it's being used. But also a list targeted therapies, and some people think targeted therapies means targeted drugs, but it talks about like it's used in cancer drugs. And in a cancer drug, we're not looking at your germline DNA, we're looking at your somatic DNA, and that's the DNA that's in the cancer cell that's been mutated. And so we want to look at that mutated cell, and from that information we find there, define which therapy might be best for that particular cancer. But also when I talk about therapies, there's other therapies. It could be based on our DNA, how we respond to emergency care, how we respond to physical therapy, how important is sort of nutrition analysis for us. And also, of course, genetics is used for tissue typing, for transplantation. So a lot of areas that we use genomics. And we talk about the research, and this is, of course, was the world of the academic centers where they would do the early research. They would look at small cohorts of patients, usually around one disease. Usually the numbers were just in the few thousands. And from there, they would come up with what they determined would be, they found variants in either one or multiple genes, and that those variants are pathogenic and can cause the disease. And a lot of our current knowledge that clinical care is based on comes from those studies. But we've realized really that in order to truly validate those results and to expand our knowledge base on variants, we need to have much higher numbers in our studies, much higher cohorts. We need to be in the hundreds of thousands. We need to be in the millions. And so now you're finding healthcare systems getting involved with these type of genomic studies. Obviously, commercial clinical trials and pharmas that are expanding not only within the clinical trial, but pharmas are actually sponsoring the cost of a lot of very large sequencing initiatives. One example is the pharma company Regeneron, which sponsored the sequencing for a large study at Geisinger Health System. And that model is expanding. And of course, a lot of national initiatives, besides the ones that you've heard in the U.S., where we have the All of Us national initiative, there's a 35 or more other countries around the world that all have their own national initiatives where they're doing genomic studies. You're probably aware that the FDA for several years now has recommended for about 150 drugs that ordered physicians also do what they call companion diagnostic. That's a genetic test that would help determine whether or not that drug would be of efficacy for the patient, and how that patient might metabolize that drug, or if they might be hypersensitive to that drug. And that list of drugs is going to continue to expand, of course. I mentioned this thing about knowledge bases because this is going to be something that will be part of clinical genomics systems more and more going forward. And I mentioned just a couple of knowledge bases here as examples. There are many more than what I have listed, but a lot of these research studies that were willing to share their data would post their data to a site called ClinGen. This is a site that's sponsored by the NIH, specifically the NHGRI within the NIH. That's the National Human Genome Research Institute. And from that list of data and the determinations of what variants are pathogenic or not, they put that into a database called ClinVar. And what's interesting is there are several products being developed, clinical interpretation products that access that knowledge base, and it's kind of one of their main engines that their product runs off of. And the same is true for the other knowledge base I've listed here, the Clinical Pharmacogenomic Implementation Consortium, or CPIC for short. There are pharmacogenomic tools that you can purchase that use as their knowledge source this CPIC database. And so you're going to see these knowledge bases be developed and increase more and more over time and become sources of information and data for a lot of products in the future. And the last thing I wanted to point out here is ACMG, the American College of Medical Geneticists, a few years back stated that they think that any type of genetic testing that includes one or more of the list of 59 genes that they have come up with, that they recommend that the results of those genes be used in clinical care because they feel like there's enough clinical information and evidence that shows that the clinician can provide actionable care to the patient from information in those 59 genes. And also, if patients have had tests done that have one of those or more of those 59 genes, that you should return all the results of that comes from that test back to the patient. So what's also going on in the industry is that doctors are utilizing more testing, and certainly we think of cancer, pharmacogenomics, maternal fetal medicine, et cetera, as kind of the areas that this happens a lot. But there are other specialty areas, behavioral health, pulmonology, neurology, et cetera, that are increasing its use of genetic information. But the problem is it really in all of these areas, genetic testing is still not considered standard of care. A lot of this testing has come from the ground up, from the individual physician, where on their own they decided they wanted to do genetic testing to treat their patients. And so it is growing, certainly, but we haven't really reached the level of what I call standard of care. The testing has gone from looking at one or just a couple of genes to really the minimum is doing these gene panels. A gene panel can consist of 50 genes, 100, 150 genes, and they usually focus around a specific disease category like a cancer or cardiovascular disease. But those we are doing these gene panels because the costs have come down to be able to do them, and instead of doing a test that only covers a couple of genes, it really costs the same to do a panel that covers a lot more genes. And of course, the use of whole exomes and whole genomes are greatly increasing. And whole exomes are, if you don't know, it's a whole genome sequence, except they don't sequence everything in each gene. They only sequence the coding areas of that gene, and so it can be done quicker and cheaper. But whole genomes is, I think, really where the future is going, because costs are coming down and volume is going up. There's new labs that have merged just in the last 5 years that are now everybody knows about it and are going to. So this part of the industry is really growing. I had mentioned earlier that there are systems products, software-based products that clinicians, healthcare systems can use that provide an interpretation service, so that when a clinician orders, like let's say a large gene panel or a whole genome, and they want to know everything that's in the result of that type of a test, and what does it mean to them as a clinician and how they need to treat their patient. These services help them interpret the results of that test and it includes, classifying the different variants. Are they pathogenic or are they benign? And it also include a reclassification of those variants, meaning that over time, as new information, new studies are available, if we previously have variants that we don't know what their significance is, and now we do, we need to get that reclassified information back to the clinician and to their patient. So there's these services that are now evolving to do just that. The next bullet is more of a editorial comment for me, but I see that, or I hope to see that within the industry, that this genomic testing becomes more patient-centered rather than doctor or specialty-centered. Right now, a doctor, let's once again use cancer as an example, will order some testing for a patient, and they'll use the results to treat that patient, but that data is really not linked to the patient's electronic health record, and other doctors aren't aware that that data might be there, especially if that test result comes back as a PDF and is stored somewhere deep in the bowels of the EHR system as a PDF. So we need to really move from this kind of a doctor-centric system, or when we do genetic testing, genomic testing, to more patient-centered testing. Finally, I just wanted to mention that there was a white paper that the work group completed a couple of years ago that talked about genetics and care coordination. And in there, we argue how if you look at from a patient perspective, all the different type of healthcare services and providers they might see, whether from primary care or specialty care, or even from nursing or physical therapists or nutritionists, et cetera, that a coordination needs to happen around that available genetic and genomic information of the patient. So if you haven't seen that white paper yet, you can click on this link and go see it. So let's go further, talking about the industry in the area of technology and computer systems and what's going on there. So more healthcare systems are building out formal clinical genomic programs. Like I said previously, it really started organically with doctors on their own deciding they wanted to provide genetic testing for their patients. But now within the formal structures within healthcare systems, they are talking about doing genetic testing and developing policies around it and procedures and that type of thing. And there are EHR systems that are now offering the ability to store some genetic data. And once again, most of that genetic testing is being received from labs and stored in EHR systems in a PDF. But some of them are now offering the ability to store a limited amount of genetic data, and really just kind of covers a limited number of use cases. And so once you have still that limited data, then it's still limiting the ability to do clinical decision support around genetic and genomic based data and information. That's finally changing. Early on, when I would ask the HR vendors, why aren't we doing genetics? They would say, well, our customers aren't really asking for it. And then after that, they said, we're focusing on meaningful use requirements and that type of thing. But now I'm seeing a final opening into this world of EHR systems and being able to receive and store and use CDS based on genetic information. Limited right now, but at least moving forward. And I say I use the word limited when I'm talking about data sharing and system interoperability. It's actually really almost non-existent. There might be some people that are sharing some data and trying to be interoperable with their systems, but it's extremely limited right now. In fact, I am aware of some organizations like the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health has some projects around sharing data that have been pretty successful so far. But that really needs to expand much further. I mentioned here HL7 fire genomic standards are just now being adopted. HL7, I mentioned I worked with HL7 for the past 13 years with their clinical genomics work group. And and back in 2007, 8, 9, we developed standards back then that would help a lab system to transmit discrete genetic and genomic data to an EHR in such a way that, like I say, in a discrete encoded format so that you could do CDS on it. But those early standards in previous formats, previous to FHIR, just were never adopted. But now FHIR seems to have caught the attention of vendors, those that develop these software systems, and they are very much open to and working on adopting FHIR. Now FHIR Genomics, of course, is a specific set of standards by itself. So, people can adopt FHIR, but not adopt FHIR Genomics. But we're hoping that that's going to change, and we'll see more adoption of the HL7 genomic standards. The questions around how do we store genomic data, what's the governance structure, who owns the data, all those questions are still in flux. And I wanted to mention another white paper that our work group has done in the past. This is our more recent one. We're looking at the question, like the top of bullet there, healthcare systems that are looking to develop formal clinical genomic programs, and what are the processes would they have to go through to do that? And we divided up the answer to that question into two parts. And the first part was just focusing on what are the clinical and business drivers that an organization would have to address and be aware of as they make their plans. And we put that in a white paper. As part of those business drivers, we do have a section on health insurance, and so written by people from the health insurance industry, and did an excellent job with some great information there. So that's another white paper that you can go to for some information. The part two, that's just going to focus on building out an IT infrastructure to support all this, is that work is underway. So let's look at some of the issues and changes that are going on within the industry. And from a health insurance perspective, these questions continue. What are the reasons to cover or not cover a large gene panel, like I mentioned previously, especially if it's only for risk assessment? And this really is based around the question of why should we cover genetic testing? We do want, I should do a little bit different. People agree that we should cover genetic testing when it helps the doctor treat the patient. And that's kind of more sick care, as opposed to what if we look at something different? What if we're looking at prediction, preventative care? And so, do we cover large gene panels that might be more on that area where we're just looking at risk? What about the reasons to cover or not cover testing that helps us solve a diagnostic odyssey? This is like a newborn that is ill, and the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with the newborn, and so they want to do what they call an exome trio, including the newborn and the two biological parents, to see if they can determine genetically what might be going on with the newborn. But also, reasons to cover, not cover, expanding that use case. If one family member seems to have a heritable variant that might make them at high risk for developing disease, do you consider doing testing the other family members? What about the future of coverage if whole genome sequencing drops below 500? A lot of times they use numbers that the whole genomes was at 1 million, and then that's 100,000 and 10,000. Now we're at the 1,000 level to do whole genome. And people say, the next big number is going to be $100. But what if it's just, I think even just under 500? Will change the financial questions quite a bit. What if we can get those results in an hour instead of right now taking a couple of days? What if we can do this testing so cheaply and so quickly, and that over time, as the sequencing instruments improve their quality up to a point where they can say that they can read 100% of all of the sequences correctly, we might do multiple or repeat that whole genome multiple times until the technology gets to that point. What about the patient drivers? This whole world of direct-to-consumer started with 23andMe, but has expanded beyond that. Now direct-to-consumer is going to be healthcare delivery. I can go to a Walgreens and get medical care from a doctor and I can shop based on cost and based on convenience. So there's a lot of consumer-based drivers that the industry is having to think about. And I threw in ancestral testing because a lot of people are doing that for genealogy, and they don't really realize that those tests, the chips that are used to do that genetic testing, collects a lot more sequence data, SNP data, that has nothing to do with your ancestry, but can be used to inform you about medical issues, health issues. So, that's just like a half a step away to go from ancestral testing to testing for medical care. I did want to mention that we started to develop, still are dealing with the shortage of genetic counselors. But one interesting thing that's happened is that there's a bill in Congress now to make Medicare reimburse for genetic counseling. So, things like that are affecting the industry and the future industry. And of course, so many more issues. These are just some that I wanted to share in our short time. So let's jump in and talk about, based on that sort of, hopefully some sort of a big picture, some sort of where you can see different pieces of the puzzle that are all trying to work with each other. Let's see how we think that the healthcare industry what are the issues within the industry and what are the opportunities for innovation. So I got just a couple of, like I say, very high level questions that I know that the industry is dealing with, and we'll discuss there might be some possible opportunities for innovation there. So what is the industry's been always saying, what's the value of genomic testing to the industry, to the insurer, and to their members? I know that when genetic testing first was coming out, the statements were, it's just going to be a new cost center. It's just going to raise costs. It's not going to really add any value. And I think that hopefully that thinking over time is hopefully going away, but hopefully moving towards, how can we look at genetic testing as an opportunity? And especially now that we've got a lot of clinical guidance to help us use testing for predictive diagnostic and treatment purposes. And it supports, like we've already shown, there's a lot of different clinical indications and benefits to the patient. So if our thinking starts going into that direction, then here's where I think we can go with that. And this is you'll see on these next slides with these green boxes. This is Grant's crazy ideas. So you can take it for what it's worth here. But this goes back to the idea of can we look at using genetic information on patients, can we move from a model that is just a reimbursement for sick care to a model that reimburses for patient wellness? And if we looked at a patient wellness model, then we could start using genetic information to start early on in the patient's life, doing risk planning or early detection, so we could maybe treat developing disease conditions earlier and cheaper and react quicker. We have more accurate diagnosis. And with the promise of all these targeted treatments, all of this, I think, could contribute to a lot of cost reduction and quality improvement. And if that argument is true, and I think it's worth discussing, then the medical underwriting needs to look at developing new models. And the other thing I just wanted to share here was, in order really to generate the knowledge to validate this and get to this goal, we're going to need to have cross-stakeholder collaboration to do this. So in my view, the health insurance industry would need to collaborate with folks outside of the insurance industry to achieve this goal. What about the differences between Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance covering genetic and genomic testing? That's always been kind of a struggle for many people, that there's differences in policies and coverage. And are those differences a problem? Well, it shows that there's no standard of care around genetic testing, and I think that is a problem. And would the industry, the health insurance industry, benefit by agreeing to testing coverage standards? And so if they thought the answer to that could be yes and wanted to talk about that, then here's some opportunities. I'd like to see the industry support the concept of what I call a patient data ownership of their genomic repository. And if there's a repository out there where patients can store their genetic and genomic data, and that repository they control, and that's a repository that they give permission as to who has access to it, and so that they can give that permission to any provider or any healthcare system to have access to that data. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And then you don't have that problem of a patient is in one area with one healthcare system, has genetic testing done, that data stored behind the firewalls and deep in the silo of that healthcare system, and then is in another healthcare system later and needs to have genetic testing done instead of redoing the same test, which would be tragic. It would be great that the new system would have access to the data that's already been generated. And so I see this as an opportunity for, once again, industry collaboration to establish this type of a patient-centered care, and I would also say family-based care, since we are talking about genetics, and developing these coordination guidelines and processes. And really, the goal of this is to lead to where you get to where you're having the ability to support that patient, that member, using their genetic and genomic information over that patient's lifespan. So, and I'm going to talk about that lifespan concept just a little bit more here. When we talk about, okay, if we're going to be thinking about this strategically and talking about the future, and we're looking at the processes that we use right now to reach coverage decisions and determine value, what about the idea of the industry being able to share data with each other, especially evidence data of value and outcomes data of, the value of doing genetic testing? Wouldn't that be interesting if we could share that data with each other? And if we did, then we could start really considering this alternate payment models that it would be designed around whole genome sequencing from birth. So I'm really talking about how things might change in the near future as the technology around genetic testing changes and the costs come down to do it. So if that happens, then you'll have new coverage policies that I think can not only combine the member and maybe some family members. You can start tracking kind of their wellness, their health over time, and you mingle that with population genetics. So you know that your member, or if you're insuring the whole family, you know not only what's going on with them, but what populations do they belong to, and what information and knowledge do we have around that's specific to those populations, and that would change, I think, coverage policies if you look at that different type of model. What if in the future, we're going to have a future, we're going to be advancing the use of gene editing and gene therapy? And then I wanted to mention, of course, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. If we start applying that to genetics, and I know that everybody is right now, but I think within the payer industry, we're applying AI to our current risk models and trying to squeeze out just a little bit more efficiency and cost savings on the current model. But I think that would be said, I think I'd love to see AI technologies applied to new payment models and new ways of looking at how do we reimburse for and financially support the future that is more around wellness care rather than sick care, and it's based around genetic information. I think here's a list of what I think are innovative applications that can be thought about as part of this sort of like innovative future. And I have always, well, for a long time, I have been wanting to achieve this goal where we do develop this patient genomic data repository, and I call it a genomic profile or a molecular profile, because in this repository is going to be a lot more than just DNA, but also proteomic data, gene expression data, metabolic data, microbiome data. So you start creating that full molecular profile for the patient. And that database needs to be queryable so we can access it, we can learn from it, we can mix it with other clinical information, other phenotypic information. The EHRs it's linked to the EHR and it can be accessed during that patient lifespan. And I'd really think that there's a great opportunity for innovation for the payer community to support the development of something like that. Of course, this would be, once again, something that would be a multi-stakeholder activity, collaboration, but great, I think, huge opportunities there for innovation. What about, having apps that manage this question around cascade and family testing? And what do you do with incidental findings? If you don't know, incidental findings is when a doctor wants to look at the genetics for a patient for one particular disease, but the test result comes back with a lot of information about the patient's genetics that don't have to do with just your disease of interest. So you get findings that are incidental. How do you manage that? And the whole, how do you manage the reinterpretation of those results when our knowledge of this genetics changes over time? A great opportunity there. And I really see a lot of these things. People see these things, sometimes see these things as just more cost. I see them as cost savings, opportunities for cost savings, and increased quality of care. The opportunity to share data sets, especially with the pharma industry, is another crazy idea. I'm going to mention this another time. But really, having the payer industry take a place at the table and drive policy for genomic data interoperability and sharing, I think, is a great opportunity. So I'm going to share some what I call some scary or heretical thoughts, okay, that I think are really out there. But, if we have a future of when cost testing is really no longer an issue, then to me, the old paradigm around ensuring that member changes. Now, especially since there are new laws, I think, already passed that allow for employees not to have to be put into one plan that the employer has chosen, but they could choose any plan that they want to. What a great marketing opportunity for the payer community, and to change this viewpoint of, hey, I don't want to pay for genetic testing now because 5 years from now that person's going to move to another employer and will not be a member. And therefore, we're paying something that somebody else will benefit from. But if you have this now where you can be a lifetime insurer, I think that changes that whole question. So once again, partner with a lot of different stakeholders. Partner with providers. Build that patient genomic data repository, that molecular profile. And really look at how things like pharmacogenomics is expanding and see how you can partner with that. There are, in fact, some employers that are looking to provide a pharmacogenomic test to their employees as a benefit. a really interesting idea and another great opportunity. Partner with pharma so we could stop the paying for the ineffectual drugs. We can do this at the patient level. Huge opportunity there. I know a lot of people have been thinking about this, but I think that partnership and the sharing of data needs to come closer together. Partner with patients, your members, encourage them to do early sequencing. Know that they're not going to have a penalty from doing that. Partner with app developers. Partner with EHR vendors. I know this is all kind of strange stuff, but encourage people to use these apps, especially apps that are focused specifically on medical conditions that they have and that they need to manage. And what a great opportunity to bring that to members who are high risk or high utilization. I think some crazy ideas, but could possibly be some opportunities for innovation. So with that, I'm going to just do the last couple slides here, and then we'll have some time for questions. What do I see is just coming over the horizon? Once again, as you can see, I really want to see this happen, and so I mentioned it multiple times. The creation of that molecular profile for the patient should become standard of care, and it should be owned and controlled by the patient to where they can direct access to it to a healthcare system, to a doctor, to a clinic, to a clinical trial, to an academic study, to a national initiative. A lot of these opportunities for the patient to give access to their data based on what they want to do. Really have those different repositories available to AHRs. And, there's this whole area of patient data ownership that's coming, this whole idea of participatory health. And I added this sub-bullet just, I think, yesterday when I saw a news announcement about United Health Group purchasing the website Patient Like Me, which I think is a fabulous idea. And I really applaud the people at United Health Group for really thinking outside the box. And this is a great example of that partnering with other stakeholders. Sharing data outside of current models, the FHIR standards being more widely adopted, and the opportunity for the Smart on FHIR app. Smart on FHIR is a kind of a technology where if everybody uses the same standardized APIs, then I can create an app that will run both on an Epic system and run in a Cerner system and run in a new startups system, and so you have this ability to create apps that can run it on multiple environments at the same time. Start using AI machine learning for genetics in the area of discovery, prediction, and intelligent care delivery. Huge opportunities, I think, exciting things to come there. And what's going to come from an analysis of data that we really didn't combine previously, like family health history, environmental nutrition, data that's coming from patients, home devices, a lot of things like that. And then this whole world of gene editing and synthetic biology, I think, is going to be fascinating going forward. So that's just some of the, I think, to me, some of the fun stuff to look forward to. So let me just say how, from what you've heard, hopefully this is what your appetite to contribute to the work group. So I'm just going to talk one last slide here before we open up for questions about the work group. So we are hoping to within the work group, start a new activity, a new project around just what we talked about in this presentation. So we're going to talk about the concepts about what we just covered as a baseline, but then get input from any current members or any new members of the work group, and create an outline for this white paper. And then identify who would like to contribute, who'd like to be a writer and begin writing. Those who call in to the work group don't have to volunteer for their time. A lot of times what's also great is just to hear comments and people's experience and some knowledge that they've gained that would contribute to the white paper, that's fantastic. You don't have to volunteer to write, but there's are others who like to write a couple of paragraphs here and there or one page, and they add that to the full white paper, and that's fantastic too. So with this, we'd like to go just, maybe a little bit beyond just the white paper, but, create a list of what we think are the opportunities for innovation in the health insurance industry. And if we said, okay, what would it take for the industry to get there? What kind of plan would we need to have? What would be the priorities and strategies and new ways of thinking to do this? And how to sort of like create this as a standard idea throughout the industry. And our next work group call is actually coming up next week on July 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to get more information on participating with the WED Genomics work group, you can email Samantha, and she can give you information. I also threw up my email address, and certainly you could reach out to me for questions too, not only about the work group, but maybe about this presentation or anything else. So I'll stop there. We have some few minutes to entertain some of your questions.
Thanks so much, Grant. And while folks are continue to type in their questions, we'll start off with the first two questions. Could you tell us more about what EHRs can do or will do with genomic data, what you see as possibilities for genomic-based clinical decision support, and what other type of data could be used in CDS?
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of people, think about the world of technology, especially around the electronic health record, and how a lot of money has been spent in the past on implementing these EHRs and how they are really the system that so many of our care providers use to treat us, whether at an inpatient setting, outpatient setting. And I had mentioned previously that we're just now finally getting to the point where we're looking at getting genetic data from labs into these EHRs in a straight and coded way. When the information comes via a PDF, a lab result comes back to the clinician who ordered the test as a PDF, the computer cannot read the data, cannot make any sense of that data. And so therefore, you can't really do decision support with it. It's like when a doctor wants to order a drug for Dr. X orders a drug for a patient, and that's put into the electronic health record system. And then that patient sees Dr. Y, and Dr. Y orders another drug for that patient, but that second drug is contraindicated to the first drug. Then the clinical decision support is supposed to pop up and say, hey, you probably weren't aware, but Dr. X ordered this drug. The drug you want to order is contraindicated, so here's a list of alternate drugs that you should prescribe for the patient. So it's the same idea for clinical decision support when you start wanting to combine genetic information along with lab results or other clinical information, past diagnoses that are already in the system, and then you want to even combine that with family health history data that we need to have the EHR systems have access to, at least to have the access to the risk result of that family history information. And you start combining that with other information, and you really get to the point where you can develop a really intelligent-based system that is based on the patient's genetic and genomic information. And of course, when you throw in that molecular profile, you expand that data even further. So there really is this huge opportunity, I think, there that we haven't really gotten into yet. And I see that the healthcare industry as a driver and a partner, a collaborative partner and trying to build out this capability and at least have it as a goal. It has it as an industry goal that we all work on this together and try to get to that point where we can do that type of advanced stuff with our EHRs.
Thanks, Grant. Next question, could you tell us more about how the work group will write the white paper?
So what we've done in the past is we really wanted to start with coming up with a solid outline, and we've discussed how we think it's a great opportunity to write a white paper that focuses specifically on genomics and the payer industry. And so the best way to go about accomplishing that, based on what we've done previously with our other white papers, is to really come down with a solid outline. And this is where getting input from people is really important. A lot of the information or concepts or topics that will go into that outline, I think we've covered some of that here, but we want to fill it in with people who have knowledge and experience, obviously, that I don't have, or that other members of the work group maybe don't have. And so it's really critical to have people to contribute to that outline. And once we put that outline together, then it's really easy to go to the next step and just say, let's get volunteers who are excited about maybe different parts of that outline. They go, oh, hey, this is an area that I know a lot about, I've read a lot about, I have a lot of material on, and that I could write, a couple of paragraphs or a page or something like that, and it'd be really good. And so then over time, we, bring all of those contributions from the multiple writers together, and we go through it one last time where we want to make sure, since you do have multiple authors, you try to do a little bit of editing where you try to maybe use some similar terminology throughout the whole paper and make sure it flows and it sounds like it comes from one voice type of thing. I tell you, it's great when we get to the end and you produce something that you think has a lot of value, and we do think it has a lot of value, and they do a press release on it. And so we think there's a great opportunity for this topic. And that there's not a lot of other organizations that are talking about this within the payer industry from the viewpoint of genomics. So we think this is a great opportunity to participate in an activity like this.
Well, thank you so much, Grant. Those are the only two questions that have come in. Is there anything else that you would like to leave our audience with before we wrap up today's webinar?
Though the one last thought is for those of you who have decided to take your time to do this webinar, please be the voice within your own organizations. Be the voice for saying, hey, there's great opportunities here. We have a lot of different innovative ideas that we could share with you and drive conversations within your own organizations, because I think there's just, like I said before, a lot of opportunity for innovation to do this. So be the driver yourself in your own organizations to do this. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. That concludes today's webinar. I'll be following up with everybody with the link to the recorded webinar along with the slide deck. Thank you for your participation. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week.